I've spent all of today looking at the lap times. This is how boring I am from last year to this year, and wondering what have they all been doing over the winter, because the gaps by and large are the same.
Thanks for that, Jeremy. But there is one team that hasn't maintained their gap.
Welcome to the Tired F1 Pod. We are back and better than ever. Shez, how are you doing?
Man, tired. How are
Tired
you?
is the right word, man. But we're a week removed now from the next Grand Prix. It feels like it's far away, right?
Yeah, but there's a lot of stuff that Australia's just thrown up a huge bunch of questions. We picked up one of those questions in our last video about Carlos, Charles, and Lewis. And today we're going to talk about another big question, and that is how bad a Mercedes-Benz? Like, what is going on, man?
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, and we've gotten great feedback from the whole Ferrari trifecta situation, if you will. But Mercedes has been the team that sort of skated under the radar a bit, thanks in part to what's going on at Ferrari with Carlos's resurgence, if you want to call that, with all of the Red Bull drama that's been going on. But I mean, really, if you put those two things aside, I would argue that the biggest storyline of this season is actually how bad Mercedes are. And this is not conjecture, this is not speculation. We are responding and reacting to the words and the interviews of Toto Wolff, Lewis Hamilton, George Russell. This is coming out of their team. This is not the rumor mill making things up. And I guess I'm gonna say this, and this is probably not going to sound very controversial. This has to be the worst start for Mercedes in the last 3 years, given what they already knew, what the last couple of years were like, and they've had a chance to respond to everything that they've learned in the last couple of years, and it's a bit of a head scratcher as to what's going on. So I am totally confused about what's going on at Mercedes. But I'm guessing, Shez, you have a little bit of a better idea of what's going on there.
I mean, I don't, but I agree, and I think um, it's not just you. Lewis has also been on record as saying this is the worst start to a season he's ever had. I don't know if he was necessarily just talking about the car or himself, because he definitely needs to up his qualifying game. But there are some problems at Mercedes. There are some big problems at Mercedes, and for the first time ever, the first time since 2022, and all of the trouble started, I feel like something needs to change, because this can't keep going on the way it is at the moment.
It's a pretty fundamental issue that they're dealing with, right? If what they're telling us is actually true, it seems like their simulator is not able to correlate with what their on-track performance looks like. It just seems like this is like they would have to go back to a 101 course on how to set this up. And it is pretty surprising, astonishing. You know, you can pick whatever word you want to describe it to talk about an 8-time winning constructor. Like, this is crazy. Like, I don't know what is going on. They seem to have missed the mark so badly now, right? That they're coming in year 3 of these regulations. And let's just step back for a second. When 22 started, I would have thought that if there was one individual that would have had come out on the back foot and maybe not have been as engaged as they should have, that entity would be the driver in Lewis Hamilton, given what he had just gone through in 21. But it seems like he came back with a much more positive and sort of a great mindset. I know it took a little bit of time, but Mercedes have completely, like, it seems like they've had this huge hangover, right, from the 8 years over, and it seems like they sort of relied on their laurels, and
Yeah,
and they had,
yeah,
and look, it had been successful for a while, but we go through the season of porpoising and what 2022 looked like, and then you had that one win tucked in there that really sort of took them in a completely different direction that they shouldn't have, and then it's been crazy the whole last year. They
yeah.
don't seem to have been in the mix at all.
The problem that I have at the moment is that 2024 was supposed to be the big season. They said, look, we've got over all of the problems. Toto's even said we have solved all of the issues that we had last season. So we don't have the suspension issue, we don't have all the other various issues. And now we're finding that we just don't have pace, right? And he's right. He's right. So I looked at the super times. So just if you don't know what a super time is, a a super time, I think, is probably the most accurate way to look at the pace of a car compare as an absolute over the course of a weekend. And what you're doing is that you're taking the fastest lap of that weekend. So in the case of the three races that we've had so far, it's Bahrain, Saudi, and Australia. It was the Red Bull in qualifying three every time. So that was the fastest lap. And you set that as 100%. And every car that is slower than that is a number of percentage points above that.
Above that, yeah.
Above that, yeah. Why do I do that instead of just doing tenths of a second? Because that's easier to understand. Well, it's just because different circuits have different lengths, so the percentage actually just corrects for the length, right? Like being a tenth of a second slower in Monaco is a bigger deal than being a tenth of a second slower at Spa, for example, right? So the percentage corrects for that. Anyway, in terms of how they've done year on year, currently Mercedes are on the same trajectory as they were in 2022. Right? That's the headline figure here. That they improved last season. They actually got much closer by the time they got to Australia than they had this season, in 2022, sorry. But in 2024, they've gone back towards what they were doing in 2022. And that's in a season where the team came out and said, we've solved all of our problems, we've learned all the lessons, we've changed all our models, here's our car that's completely new, brand new concept, and they're just as far away as they were when all of the trouble started. That's a big, big red flag for me. And the question for me is why and what happens next?
Yeah, this is really crazy. And I've read rumors about Toto Wolff replacing himself, I guess, because he's part owner. Like, but that sounds a bit crazy and a bit of an overreaction. But my one takeaway from how the season has started is that there's one guy that's really happy about what he did this offseason, which is Lewis Hamilton, and he seems to have made the right choice in picking a team that's on the upswing. And certainly we would have hoped that Mercedes would have been up there in terms of being able to get back, but they don't seem to have the capability in place to get there. And unless they're again pulling off one of these bluffs that they have in the past, it's really hard to imagine. This one feels really different though, right? Doesn't it? It doesn't look like
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I read a tweet. This is a shout out to Jeppy Allison, who started to who mentioned that there are now rumors that some of the partners that Mercedes have got are either trying to pull out or they want to downgrade their commitment. That is a really worrying sign to me, right? Because for me, the sign that a team can recover versus the sign that a team is starting to go into that long decline is exactly that. When the partners start to say, we don't trust you anymore, then you really have to start to worry. This is what happened to Williams. This is what happened to McLaren. When Vodafone left McLaren and didn't want to renew their title sponsorship deal, when BMW and HP left Williams, you started to see that the teammates still had that belief, but the decline starts to happen, and it happens in the background, and then you end up in a situation where they become underfunded, they become
it's a vicious
they don't
cycle,
have the
basically.
resources, and it just goes round and round and round. And this is the kind of thing that it starts with. And my worry is that the way that 2024 has started, I can't shake the feeling that this is where that process starts.
When I think in addition to everything you've said, right, they've got at least a couple of major hurdles that will make it next to impossible for them to climb this mountain, so to speak. One is that we are in a cost cap era, right? And we've talked about this in the past where you cannot outspend your way out of correcting mistakes or fixing equipment or whatever that might look like, right? That teams like Mercedes, like Ferrari, like Red Bull have been able to do in the past. So that is not something that they can do. Even if they want to, there's just no way to do that. So there's no way to catch up, so to speak. Like catching up really means time, which is now you have to already start looking at 25,
But Ammar,
26, right?
that's not true
And
though,
even
right? Because like even in a cost cap era, look at what Ferrari have done season to season. Okay,
well, but
they had completely the wrong concept, in 2022, which they stuck with in 2023 because they thought that they could optimize it. Then they had to make a big change in the middle of the season. They gradually got closer, and by the end of the season, they were the closest challengers to Red Bull. They won a
yeah,
race,
but
and they were close to winning another one in Vegas. And
okay.
this season, they're even closer. They're challenging on merit now.
I don't disagree with you, but the difference that is exactly what, so you're sort of building into my second point, which is now the teams that they're up against have caught up much further to Red Bull. And so that delta that they will have to make a big swing. And yes, it's absolutely possible. But now you have, I mean, Red Bull's the standard. Ferrari is right there, thereabouts. You have McLaren, and you also have Aston in the mix. And these teams appear to be on a much better path towards Red Bull. I'm not saying that they will all be right there or they'll all be within a tenth of Red Bull. That's probably not going to happen for all of them, but that's who Mercedes will have to compete with, as opposed to Ferrari was already, in second place or third place last year. I know that was kind of one of those things. I mean, Ferrari had the lone victory in the year or two, right?
Yeah.
So I don't disagree that they would be able to do it. I just think that it would be a greater mountain to climb in terms of, if I think about,
Well,
can they
I
challenge for
mean,
race wins, right? Because they're not just competing against Red Bull. Now I mean, look, the only example, I mean, let's forget Red Bull for a second, but George Russell, up until he crashed, was about 50 seconds behind the race leader in Carlos Sainz. We're not talking about Max here. That is damning. There's no way around it.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it changes the task though. The task is still to
Sure.
beat the quickest team on the grid, right?
Fair enough.
However many teams there are in front of you, that task is still the same. You still want to beat the fastest team, right? And they're further away from doing that now, and there are more other teams in between them. I agree. In championship terms, it's a big issue. I think they're going to struggle to finish second this season. I think they're going to struggle to finish in the top three this season if McLaren continue their trajectory as well. But in terms of their ultimate aim, because there is still that arrogance within the team that they can be the best, and I like that. I don't have a problem with that, right? But that means that their aim isn't to beat Ferrari or McLaren; it's to beat Red Bull, right? And that's what they're aiming for. It's just that they're further away from doing that than they were last year. With the completely new concept that was supposed to fix everything. And I just want to dig into a little bit about what James Allison said. So James Allison came into his into the debrief after Australia and answered a few questions. And one of those questions was about correlation. And he answered saying that, look, you're never gonna absolutely have an exact idea of what is happening to your car on the track without driving it on the track all the time, which they can't do because we don't do testing anymore. So the models that they have back at the factory are an estimation based on the data that they're getting back from the track, right? But he's saying that our correlation isn't working very well at the moment, right? But he tried to generalize and say that this is just you can't absolutely mirror what happens at the track. And you said it very, very eloquently, and it sounded very reasonable. But the fact is that everybody's going to have that issue, right?
Correct.
It's not just
Yep.
Mercedes.
It's not just
Correlation
them.
is a problem for everyone.
Yep.
But Red Bull have managed to overcome that. McLaren and Ferrari have been able to overcome that and not have the same correlation issues. Correlation issues was something I never thought I'd hear Mercedes-Benz say, but here we are. And my problem with it is that I think it absolutely comes back to two things. The first thing is their dedication to just looking at the data. They have talked constantly about how data is everything. And I would say, yes, it is, but you have to temper that a little bit with a little bit of intuition and a little bit of racing instinct. And a team like Red Bull, we always come back to this because Adrian Newey is the absolute benchmark for this. He has so much experience in the different departments of a Formula One team that he can turn around and say that, okay, this is the data. I can look at it. I can understand what you're telling me. But then when you apply that to the track, this is what will happen. So we need to temper that data and apply it specifically for what we think is going to happen on the track. That's why he didn't get caught out by chasing peak downforce and running the car as low as possible and running into that issue of porpoising in 2022, which is what Mercedes did. They looked at their simulation, they looked at their tools and went, right, we've got massive downforce here. We're going to be 2 seconds quicker than everybody else. So we'll just do that without actually listening to the advice that they were getting from outside. Peter Wright, the guy that worked on the Williams back in the 80s, that when ground effect was the predominant aerodynamic philosophy, who had said, look, just be careful about the porpoising. And they didn't listen. They just went for peak downforce and they got hit hard for 2 seasons.
They didn't even listen to their own drivers, by the way. So.
Exactly. They did not. And the second thing is, okay, this is about process. And I criticized Ferrari during 22 about this because it's one thing having the data, but it's another thing processing that data, right? And Mercedes have talked about their tools and how we're altering our simulation tools and things like that, right? And we're creating brand new tools to understand what's going on here so we can bring developments that are going to benefit our car. Where is the evidence for that? They seem to be using the data in exactly the same way. We did an entire video about the Mercedes-Benz front wing, right? We talked about it in a different light. We talked about it about the spirit of the rules, and let's leave that to one side. But that front wing is looking to create outwash, to outwash the front tire wake so that you have better aero going to the back to the rear of the car. Great. But that for me is them trying to recreate what they were doing in their dominant era, where the predominant aero philosophy was overbody. And it's like they're still stuck in that. Their models are still desperately trying to recreate what they were doing in their dominant era, and maximize overbody airflow when the game has changed. So I can't see that any of the models that they are creating at the moment are actually optimized for ground effects. And when people, we've seen this across social media, that people are now questioning whether or not Mercedes-Benz actually understand the ground effect era. That's where my worry comes from. Do they actually understand it? Because have they created the models that will allow them to optimize in the ground effect era? Because I can't see the evidence for that right now.
I think there's a good case to be made for the fact that they are just being complacent right now, that they have shown. Now this is evidence not of 1 or 2 races, but this is 2 years and 3 races that we're seeing this. And it seems like they have used what worked in a different era to sort of model this, not model or adapt it, but just essentially copy and paste the whole thing and expect for this to work.
This is exactly it.
Your point, the front wing is an example of something they did before, and they're trying to do it, and it just seems like a cheeky way of trying to work around and try to find a bit of an advantage. And it also seems like they're distracted by that too, right? Because look, Toto Wolff is an expert in organizational leadership and development, and he has given talks at Harvard and other Ivy League schools and everywhere, and he's talked about adapting and being nimble and being in alignment with the times. And it seems very ironic that everything that's happening within Mercedes seems to be stuck in an era of, well, we've always done it this way, therefore let's just apply this and see what happens. And I think the biggest, the most underrated element, yet the most significant element of this is the Lewis Hamilton departure, which is connected to this. And we did not have the benefit of knowing this, but in the few times that he's spoken up about this in the Netflix DTS show, you can see that frustration from him saying they're basically ignoring my advice at the hands of as you just stated, the simulation, the data. And this is the thing that bothers me about James Wells too, is that he just keeps talking about data like it's the whole and soul of everything. And it's
Correct.
not using your intuition, your gut
But
feeling, your racer's instinct. There's nothing else that you're putting into it, and just saying, okay, well, AI is telling me what to do. And then that's like,
yeah,
now
and
you're
I'm just going
just
to
putting
follow
out
it
yeah, that's
blindly.
it. So
Yeah.
that makes no sense. And so let me ask you this though. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
I was going to say that's fine. Using data is fine as long as your tools, the simulation tools that you're using, actually use that data in the right way. But there's no evidence at the moment that their tools are actually giving them the answers that they're supposed to get. They're not getting that.
Oh,
And that's why they're getting further and further away from the front, because their tools are telling them to go in the wrong direction. That front wing is a symptom of
of
them,
everything. Yep.
as you said, just trying to copy paste what they had in their dominant era to the ground effect era, and it doesn't work.
Yeah, it just seems like they're coming up with these fancy sort of, it's like, when you're not going to win just on strength, right? That you try to do all these backdoor things to kind of get, the game change if you. But I want to ask you a question, but before I
Mm.
say that, I do want to give my team some credit here because I have railed against Ferrari. You know famously that I wanted Mattia out even before he was actually out. And I think that they did the right thing when Fred Vasseur came, which is they said, hey, look, we're not there. They admitted, he made them admit, or whoever else did at that point. They admitted to themselves that we are not there. And they identified that they're nowhere close to where they need to be. And that's why they've been able to make those gains. And part of why I feel that Mercedes are in trouble here is because they are still in that mode, which brings me to the question of, is this the right leadership at Mercedes,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. That really is the question, isn't it? And at what point do we need to change? So that brings me to another sort of um, tangent slightly.
Sure.
So dynasties rise and fall, right?
Hmm.
We've seen McLaren in the 80s, we've seen Williams in the 90s, we've seen Ferrari in the noughties. They rise, they fall, and but there's always like there's always a pattern to that where you have a team or an individual that is at that organization that who are able to create that lightning in a bottle. They're able to create that dominance, and then they leave, right? So at Williams, they had Adrian Newey throughout the 90s when he left, and it was like a light switch, because from 1998 onwards, 2 years after he left, they were nowhere. And McLaren, sorry, not McLaren, Ferrari were the same. That they had that magic triumvirate of Ross Brawn, Jean Todt, and Michael Schumacher and Rory Byrne. And so the whole group of them, they left, and boom, we've been in this decline for years and years and years. And they don't suffer, I don't think, the same way that other teams do in terms of partners and things, because even if Ferrari were rooted to the bottom of the grid, which they never will be, partners and drivers and commercial entities are always going to want to partner with Ferrari, so they don't suffer from the same decline as other teams do. But they have their own problems, and they've been in the same decline for the same reason. And I think Mercedes are going to start to go through that. The only team that haven't are Red Bull, right? So Red Bull didn't lose their core staff, right? They didn't lose their core staff at the end of 2013 when they went backwards, and they were there or thereabouts through all of the fallow years. And now they're back again, and I can't help shaking the feeling that era of Mercedes dominance was just a break. It was just a break for Red Bull, where there was one element of that performance package that they didn't have, that wasn't even in their control, which is the
Hmm.
power unit. And
Hmm.
Mercedes did have that. They absolutely had the best, right? And they don't have the key guy there anymore that's going to be able to again bring the
Resurrect that in
performance that
some
they
way.
did.
Yeah.
And that was Andy Cowell. Andy Cowell's left. And you could argue that he was the most important part of that structure coming into 2014, because he understood the engine regulations better than anybody else. And you'd have banked on him doing the same thing in 2026, but he's not there anymore. But
Yeah.
the core aero team at Mercedes is still there, right? But my worry is that core aero team don't understand the brief right now. They may have done towards the middle and end of the dominant era between 2014 and 2021, but now that the rules have changed, I'm not sure that technical group are necessarily. You guys are going to come for me in the comments, but I don't know if they're fit for purpose anymore. They are hiring. One of the big hires that they made in the last couple of weeks was Simone Resta from Ferrari. I've got my thoughts about that, but what do you think about some of the hires that they're making?
Well, I think the hires that they're making are just I think Toto has identified that this requires a little bit of a step back and an organizational change, right? And I don't know again whether the pieces will actually make sense at the end of the day. I mean, to your point, I don't know if the Aero team is fit for purpose, and I don't quite understand what they're actually doing in terms of the hitting that reset button, which is why I keep coming back to the bigger question: is do we have the right leadership there, right? Is it time
Yeah.
to have much like what Gunther said about, hey, look, you're sometimes in your position too long. Is that true? I don't know. I mean, and again, when you've dominated for 8 years, right? Whatever the reasons might be, you've done many things right to be able to do it. Even with Red Bull's, engine failures, you still have to go out and execute, and it's not like someone's going to hand it to you anyway. But they've done it a certain way for such a long time. I don't know that these hires in particular will shift the balance unless they actually,
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, they won't have a Lewis Hamilton to help them, right? And so
Yeah.
this again brings that other seat into question, right? Who
Yeah.
do you bring in there? I mean, George Russell is great, but I don't know if he's at the same analytical level as Lewis is. He might be. I just don't know. But so yeah, that's another big question there too.
Yeah, look, I just want to head one thing off in the comments because this came up in a couple of our videos. People saying that the car is the way it is this season because they've done everything that Lewis asked them to do. Well, okay.
Not really, but okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
The car was nowhere in
Also
22
too
and
late.
23. Yeah, exactly. The car was nowhere in 22 and 23. And it's not the driver that looks at the data and develops the car. They can make suggestions, but they're not driving the development. So that's one that definitely needs to be headed off. But my point, my worry about this is exactly as you said. Number one, I think the aero department at Mercedes is less attractive than it has been at any other point. I think McLaren is a much more attractive place to go right now. Ferrari is a much more attractive place to go. Yeah. Aston is a much more attractive place to go because they're not stuck in the past. They're happy to innovate and look at this and with fresh eyes. Dan Fallows is now at Aston Martin. Adrian Newey's right-hand man. That's the kind of fresh thinking that they need. Simone Resta is a good hire, but he was a guy that was at Haas on secondment. I'm sorry, yes. But that's not on the same level as hiring Dan Fallows or Davide Sanchez and Rob Marshall. Those aren't the same level of hires. And you have to ask your question: does James Allison he's a genius aerodynamicist, right? That's what he does. But what I don't understand is how he can have been so wrong-footed. Now he's only had an off season in the role, right? Because Mike Elliott sort of left halfway through last season, so he's only had the development of this particular car to fall back on. So maybe we do need to give James Allison a bit more time. But you wouldn't have expected Adrian Newey to have dropped the ball like that. He would have got it straight away, and that. I hate I mean, I really like James Allison, but none of this fills me with confidence, and that I agree with you. Does there need to be a change there? And if there is, who? And I understand where this is fully going. I know what you're saying about does this need to be Toto Wolff that needs to step back? I understand that, and I take your point because I think with Toto, there's a little bit of, like you said, complacency, and there's a bit of arrogance there. James Allison came back in the debrief and said, look, we've got our pit stop sorted. We've got our strategy sorted. It's just pace. And I sat there, I listened to that with my jaw on the floor because I was like, you guys were doing 3-second pit stops like 5 minutes ago. Where was your operational nous then? It wasn't there. There's so much that needs to improve. And that does come from the top. And you do need to wonder if they've got a good culture at Mercedes, But is that culture of no blame, has it been taken so far that no blame has become no fault either? Like we haven't done anything wrong. Everything we're doing is right. It's a problem with
Well,
circumstance.
and I think this is the problem, right? The arrogance. There's a great example of this going back to 2022, which is Brazil, right? And look at where that arrogance sort of played itself into.
Oh,
They had a one race. We'll just call it a fluke, right? But okay, maybe they won on merit on that in that particular track. Fair enough. But that one race arguably changed the direction, because had they failed that race, maybe all of this is happening 12 months ago. Maybe there's a little bit more time to catch up. But that's what I'm saying again, is maybe you bring in the best of the engineering crew, the best of the technical staff in there. But if the mindset is still going to be, hey, we're starting with this starting point, which is this has been the standard for 8 years. We have done it this way, and therefore this works. And oh, by the way, we will go off of what the data says, which, however good it is or bad it is, or correlate or not correlate, this is what we're going with. Then you're right. It's not an attractive place to be. I also don't think an Adrian Newey necessarily could fix it too, even if they could get him, right? Because
yeah.
unless you say, what
This,
have we talked about with Red Bull, right? It's letting Adrian be Adrian too, right? It's a little bit of that too, and that doesn't seem to be the culture. Now, in their defense, they've done a lot of winning too. So we cannot just stand up here and be critical of every element of it, where that's been proven to be the case. But this is exactly how dynasties are.
yeah. Well, yeah, this is the thing, isn't it? When you fail to adapt and you fail to move with the times, yeah, the Adrian Newey thing is an interesting one, because I think Mercedes would know how to use him, because I think the technical team are given a lot of freedom. Like there's not a lot of interference from the Mercedes board. Toto Wolff is also happy to let them do their thing.
Yeah,
But
probably.
and they did make a change. They did switch over from Mike Elliott and did bring James Allison in, but that hasn't brought the step change that I thought it would. Now maybe they will. Maybe they're going to prove us both wrong, and this is
Maybe.
just a 3 race
Yeah.
bad streak, and they're going to come, hit a good trajectory. My worry with that though is that that's what they've done for the past 2 seasons. They get a good trajectory again,
Right.
and they fall into thinking that they're doing okay.
And the
Um,
competition is so much more tighter too, right? I mean, those other teams that we're talking about, there's legitimately 4 teams that could,
yeah,
given on a race day,
yeah.
change the complexion of the race itself. So
And Merc are arguably now the fourth or fifth fastest team.
yeah,
They got lucky that the Astons somehow forgot how to drive in quali 3 in Australia and gave George
yeah, yeah,
eighth, right? Because
yeah,
otherwise
yeah. And
otherwise
if
they would have been ahead, and they
and
were in quali 2.
and if not for the Fernando penalty, Aston would be above Mercedes in the standings now, which is exactly what it feels like, even though it isn't actually true at the
Yeah,
moment. But
that would be on merit where they should be,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So I guess the final question to this is, okay, if we're saying, well, if at least we're suggesting that there needs to be a change at the very top, that maybe the culture there needs to change. I'm still not completely sold on the fact that it needs to be, but I think we're getting to that point where that open, blame-free culture is starting to become counterproductive.
yeah.
What needs to change, and who needs to
Yeah.
be brought in?
Yeah, I'm not one to call for people losing their jobs or deciding to do something else when they've proven over the years to sort of do great things at a great level, sustainably and with a streak that is admirable by every stretch of the imagination. But I think we're just asking that question right now, right? Is, given what we've seen in the first 3 races this year, the last couple of years of what they've been, um, how long before we start calling for a real change at the top level, right? And I don't know, I'd give it another 2 or 3 more races, but I think we'll know very quickly, right, whether they're in the mix or not.
Yeah,
I
I
don't,
agree with that.
and unless Toto has a desire to step away from the team for a little bit, maybe take a break. Sometimes that's not the worst thing too, right? We've talked about this with Formula One drivers themselves, right? Taking a bit of a break and coming back is not the worst thing. And it does seem now that, if I guess Mercedes have 2 paths to choose, right? Do they try to fight and try to get as high up there as possible? or do they take that proverbial step back and sort of regroup, realign, and get ready for and mount a greater challenge maybe in a couple of years, right? And that's what they have to do. And they also have to do that with the driver selection too, which again, that will play a big role in all of this as well.
Yeah. I mean, the driver selection is a huge one, but I do want to take a quick step back from what I just said. That I think, look, I think they've changed their mechanical platform. I still think that, you know, the one change they made, that adjustable front suspension, I think that's a genius idea.
Genius idea.
Right. So there are things in there that have the potential for development. I think. I mean, I don't have the data in front of me, and I don't know what their simulation tools are doing. But if they can get those things right, there's probably a platform here that's better than what they had for the last 2 seasons. But if they don't have the right tools to process that data for the rule set that we're in at the moment,
only as good as
bottom line, that I think is their issue right now. I think we should probably wrap up at this point because we've been going on for a little while. But Ammar, that was fun as usual. We've had our thoughts on this. I'm sure everyone wants to get in and pile in on us or agree with us. We're absolutely here for every comment, and we try and read and reply to as many as we possibly can. So please like, subscribe, comment. We love it, and it keeps us buzzing until our next video, which we'll see you in next time.
Later.